Hey, happy Thursday, everybody. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and hopefully, Wellness Wednesday was a nice little breakup for you of all of the work that you've probably been assigned. I figured I'd kind of have 2 days a week where we're not doing formal lessons like this to kind of just spread things out. And I know this distance learning is new, and so if you like the idea of having a kind of Wellness Wednesday and then a free Friday where you tie a concept, I'll talk about that later, but where you tie a concept that we learned to something in real life, a movie you saw, let me give you some feedback. And if you want to keep doing those, I'm so happy to keep offering that opportunity. But today we're going to talk about a really fun theory, and I've put a lot of work into this PowerPoint, and I think this is super fun. So hopefully you enjoy it as much as I have. We are going to talk about the first theory of how we decide who am I, right? If you remember from our Tuesday presentation, I said self-concept is the answer to the question, who am I? Today, we are going to talk about one of those theories, and this is social comparison theory. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to answer, what is social comparison theory? What is the difference between upward and downward comparisons? And how does the WIDE or WIDE guide help us make comparisons? So if your parents with you and they want to hold you accountable, they can ask you these questions and you should be able to answer them really easily. Okay, so when we think about social comparison theory, we're thinking about the use of social comparisons to construct the self concept when no other objective standard is available. So let's think about this first, okay? So there's a couple of things here. So the first is social comparisons. This is you comparing yourself to other people, right? So we use those comparisons. Then, based off of that, we construct our self concept because there's not a like objective standard for us to measure to say this is who I am. For example, how do we know if we're poor if we never compare ourselves to someone who has more money? How do we know if we're competitive? How do we know if we're anxious or really any other kind of defining characteristic without comparing to someone else? Because if we didn't have people to compare ourselves to, those words kind of lose their value, right? You can't be poor if you don't know what other people make, right? So that's an example of how we define our self concept because we say, well, I know I'm not that, and I know I'm not that, so I must be this. So let's give an example. This is so good. All right, sorry, I'm laughing because this scenario is kind of funny. So you're walking alone at the beach, and you were just focusing on the beautiful water. There you are, right here, your little sandals. I wouldn't wear the hat, but he's wearing the hat. And you're just focusing on the water and the sand. Then all of a sudden, someone really attractive walks by, and all of a sudden, we compare how we look to them, even though we weren't thinking about our appearance before. And in that moment, you kind of take a big hit to your self concept. But if you think about it, so without this wonderfully snazzy gentleman with the awesome sunglasses, he's got the little donut, water donut here, his great haircut there. That is a banana, if you're wondering. Um, if you never see this person, you're not thinking about your physical appearance. It's often our physical appearance only comes into question when we see someone else, right? Even if you're scrolling, think about just scrolling on your phone. As you're laying there, you're not like, oh, I wonder what my hair looks like. I wonder what my face looks like, my hands like. But then you scroll upon someone, maybe on Instagram or whatever, and they're like dressed up, and then maybe you do start to think, well, could I look like that? Or how would I look if I had was wearing that same outfit? So that's kind of a scenario to really give us a mindset of thinking about social comparison. As we encounter other people, we start to think of different things. Okay, so let's walk through some examples. Okay, there's two things that this is broken up into. We do upward social comparisons and we do downward social comparisons. So, an upward social comparison is when we compare ourselves to someone who's better than us. Okay, this is sometimes to improve on a skill, right? So you see the cake on the left is really pretty, beautiful beading and nice decoration, and the cake on the right is not so much. And so an upward social comparison might be, wow, my cake does not look like this. Maybe I need to work on my skills to get here. So sometimes an upward social comparison can be motivation for us. However, I want you to take a second and maybe pause and think of a time where upward social comparison could be harmful. And I'm going to think, let's say maybe it's an unattainable standard, or a standard that's really difficult or out of your reach for whatever reason, that's damaging because then it just sits on you and you keep comparing and you can't get there. And that's a big hit to human motivation is if we're trying to do something that's either impossible or very difficult for us to achieve. Then we have downward social comparisons, okay? And this is when individuals compare themselves to someone who's worse than them that helps them feel better about themselves. Now let's stop here and look at the difference between these definitions. Upward is someone better, downward is someone worse. Upward helps us improve a skill, downward helps us feel better. So one is a productive thing, I want to improve a skill. Downward is a negative. You're trying to overcome a negative. So the example is teacher on the left, definitely, right? Her classroom's out of control. But she might say to the teacher on the right, or about the teacher on the right, my class is out of control, but at least they didn't tie me up like Mrs. Baker's class. Right? So she just completed a downward social comparison. She is trying to make herself feel better about this crazy situation by saying, at least it's not that one. Right? She probably doesn't want to compare herself to a better teacher because that would make her feel bad. And she might have to work to do something different to get this under control. It's much easier and quicker for her to just say, that's worse, so I can feel a little bit better about what I'm going through. That's a downward social comparison. Okay. And then we think about wide. And I'm going to walk through each of these, so don't be overwhelmed by these words. WIDE, the W is who. Okay, so this is how we compare ourselves to people. First thing we do is we evaluate our abilities by comparing ourselves to similar others. Okay, people who are similar to us. We compare ourselves to them. The second one is interpretation. So this is how we interpret social comparisons that can influence our self-concept. So you can be in a situation where you're comparing yourself with someone, and the way you interpret that comparison can decide whether your self-concept is a positive thought about yourself or a negative thought about yourself. D is the direction. This is just upward versus downward. So what we just talked about, whether you're doing an upward or a downward, right? Upward makes you feel worse, downward makes you feel better. And then E is esteem. So this is protecting our self-esteem influences our self-concept. That our goal is to feel better about ourselves, right? Everything that we do is so that we can feel better about ourselves, and that influences what we think about ourselves. So let me walk through. If you need to hear this again or just pause to read it, that's fine. I'm going to walk through some examples that might illustrate this a little better. So the first one is who. Okay, we compare it to people who are similar to us. So if you don't know these people on this screen, we've got Josh McCown, Nick Foles, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Jacoby Brissett. We got Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes here at the top. Now, these four gentlemen have something in common. They are all, or have been, at some point. Now, this is interesting. They've all been backup quarterbacks in their career. They've all also been starters, right? So that's one thing. But if we think about this caliber of quarterback, they are very similar to each other, right? In skill level. Now, Nick Foles might have separated himself by winning a Super Bowl, but for the most part, through and through, because he got benched for Gardner Minshew, go Cougs, we can see that this group of people is more similar to each other. So they certainly would benefit from comparing themselves to each other. Jacoby Brissett would do just fine comparing himself to Josh McCown. Nick Foles might do just fine comparing himself to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's had some amazing games in his career. You know, Fitz magic. He probably threw 7 touchdowns that game, but also threw 5 picks. Anyway. However, any of these four probably do not want to compare themselves to Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes, because Mahomes and Brady are in a different class, right? Where Brady has this 20-year record of excellence. Mahomes is just an amazing. He throws the ball amazing. He can move on the run and through the sidearm. It is really fascinating to watch. He just won a Super Bowl. He'll probably win 3 more. These guys would do much better to compare themselves to each other than they would to compare themselves to these two. That's the who, right? You can see how you got to choose people who are similar to you. The I for interpretation, okay? So let's say you're driving in Seattle and you see a homeless family, okay? And one interpretation could be, I know life is hard sometimes, but at least I am not like them. Okay? So this is a social situation. And if you interpret it as, at least I'm not like them, you might feel better about yourself because you differentiated yourself from them. However, if you interpret it this way, wow, I am just one medical bill away from being like that, that actually might make you feel worse about your self concept, that you have that lack of security. So, do you see, maybe practice doing some interpretations of social situations if this I one doesn't make enough sense to you? But just consider you seeing a homeless person on the street is a social interaction. You can have different mindsets about that that will change your self concept. The next one is D for direction. All right. So, excuse me. So, if you don't know who these men are, this is Joe Montana, who was a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, Peyton Manning, who was a quarterback for the Colts and the Broncos, and then Jim Kelly, who was a quarterback for the Bills. Now, let's say we're Peyton Manning, okay? And we have two directions of comparison. So, Peyton Manning's Super Bowl record is 2-2. Like, right? It's okay. It's better than people who've never been and never won. Here he is winning his first Super Bowl against the Bears, okay, in 2006. If Peyton Manning compares himself to Jim Kelly, he's going to feel real good because poor Jim Kelly was an amazing quarterback, has an amazing life story. You should check his story out. Jim Kelly took his team to 4 straight Super Bowls and lost all 4. And some of the losses were so close, so devastating. His teams were amazing, right? He had amazing talent around him. They lost all 4. So if Peyton Manning compares himself to Jim Kelly in a downward social comparison, he can feel really good about himself. However, Joe Montana went to 4 Super Bowls and he won all of them. So if Peyton Manning compares his career to Joe Montana's, he might actually feel worse about himself because Joe Montana did something that he couldn't do. So you can see how the direction, right, from a downward makes you feel good and an upward makes you feel worse, how the direction of our comparison can change our self-concept. And finally, I got to use all the football examples. This game is from 2012. I actually just rewatched it last night. Seahawks, Redskins, Wild Card Weekend. This was kind of the emergence of the Seahawks as contenders. The Seahawks were not doing so well in this game, actually. And if you watch it, the Redskins are dominant in that first quarter. But eventually RG3 gets hurt, and that kind of changes the course of the game. Afterwards, Redskins fans were saying, well, we only lost to the Seahawks because RG3 got hurt. We were the better team. They can have their worthless win. Okay? So in order to protect their self-esteem, they are casting that win as useless, as not necessary. It's only because this happened. That can make them feel better about themselves. Like we were still a great team. We just had an injury. People do that to protect their self-concept and self-esteem. And we hear this all the time. Oh, he just beat me because I was tired. Oh, I wasn't trying my hardest, right? All of those are kind of ways that we as human beings try to protect our self-esteem, okay? That's the E and wide. So if you need to go back through and just take it one by one, you could look at the first slide that explains all 4, and then look at the example and just go one by one and do that. So your task for this concept is, and this is assigned on teams, I want you to identify 3 activities that you like to do, such as sports, hobbies, and other subjects. Then make 1 upward social comparison and 1 downward social comparison for each activity. And as you identified 1 person who was better than you and 1 person who wasn't as good as you, what did you feel when you compared yourself to them? So if you're a soccer player and you're comparing yourself to a soccer player in your league or whatever, right? In your downward one, how did that make you feel? In your upward one, how did that make you feel? I want you to kind of think about and practice using these comparisons and think about how they feel. So that is your task for today. You'll turn that in on Teams, and then you are good for this week. So thank you all for engaging this week. And again, give me feedback on how you like the lessons, the activities, and just how things were. And I will see you next week.